in the public schools, not homeschool. That was impressive. If you if there's any example of not seeing more dollars needed in our own education system, or more better directed dollars maybe in our education system, that was a great example of it. So he talked a lot about, you know, what's going down here at the federal level. There's a lot of problems, obviously. There's a lot of lawlessness going beyond the Constitution. And a lot of us are scratching our heads saying, what do we do? Obviously, what we can do is not really looking at the federal government and looking at the people in Washington for answers. We need to start looking locally. We need to start looking at a state level. And luckily, like he said, both of our senators were one of the 2 of the 7 to say that, you know, this is clearly unconstitutional. And you know, a lot of us, we may not all go to college, but it's pretty clear what happened here was clearly unconstitutional. And the laws of war, you guys now know much more about laws of war, and it's pretty scary. So what we're trying to do here is either pass a resolution or an ordinance that says that this is clearly unconstitutional, and we want our county sheriffs and our police department to defend the Constitution. Just like what they said they were going to, just like the oath of office said they were going to do. It's not a crazy idea. And so what we're trying to do here is do an ordinance or resolution, and getting our elected officials at the county commissioner level, as well as our sheriffs, to say that this is clearly unconstitutional. We must protect our oath to defend the people of Lane County. And me and Shane are going across all the counties and trying to have people reinstall their oath. It's pretty simple. And we also want to make it illegal here for either businesses or federal government officials to come in and take you out of your home or take others out of their home without a warrant and without due process of law. It's not too confusing. Next one, please. So just a little bit more about the laws of war. You know, instead of breaking and entering, or instead of intelligence gathering, which they would say in laws of war, it would be breaking and entering, and we want them to hold them down to the Oregon statutes. All right, we want our county sheriff to come in and say, no, we're going to arrest you for breaking and entering. Or if they want to detention without a warrant, it is not detention; it's kidnapping. Okay, so that's what we want. Just uphold the laws that are already there. We don't want to create new laws. We just want our county sheriff to be on board, Thomas Turner. So I suggest if you guys have any link to him, we would love for him to understand this, because a lot of other county sheriffs are on board. Thomas Turner is a little bit more hesitant. He believes that his command comes from the Supreme Court justices and the president, and whatever authority comes from the top, and not in our interpretation of the Constitution here in Lane County, his constituents.
That's right.
And then also the advanced interrogation, you know, what they say under the laws of war, we're getting information. Oh, that would be assault and battery. Because, you know, if they pulled any of us out of our home without a warrant, showing us a warrant, would we just go, yes sir, yes sir? No. We would be wondering who this guy in the mask is, and we'd be fighting back, and we know we would get roughed up. So that would be assault and battery. Next one, please. So the question is, what do we do? What do we do when the federal government is clearly breaking unconstitutional laws? We all heard the checks and balances. We have the executive branch, and they can check, you know, the executive branch may not sign the law that the legislative branch passes, and even if it does, then the Supreme Court can get there and check those balances. And these 3 branches are just this perfect system, is this very horizontal system of checks and balances. But what we need to teach in our schools, and what I try to teach in our schools, is that there's a vertical checks and balances all the way down. From the president who says an oath to the Constitution, all the way down to our county sheriff who says he has an oath to the Constitution. Those are our checks and balances, all the way up and down. So there's hundreds and thousands of people who are supposed to be checking the checks and balances and checking the oath and making sure that the Constitution is being upheld. And even if we had 93 senators say that the NDAA was constitutional. 93 of them. And then the president signs it. So even though it went through the 2 federal systems, now it has to go down to the states, and the states have the right. They have the right. Our county has the right, because of their oath. Every elected official has an oath to the Constitution to say, no, this is clearly unconstitutional. All right? I don't need a law degree to say that you coming into my home without the legal paperwork, it is unconstitutional. All right? So here is a famous Supreme Court case that was already said, Marbury versus Madison, that says all laws that are repugnant are null and void. And this is also the Supreme Court case that gave, that somehow was interpreted more power to the Supreme Court than was actually granted than in the Constitution. And we also need to consider that, but that might be a lecture for another day. But I sincerely suggest that you guys look into Article 3 of the Constitution and realize that the Supreme Court is not the ultimate authority of deciding the Constitution. It is up to every single person who has pledged an oath, an elected official, to the Constitution. Those are our checks and balances, not this horizontal, but the vertical checks and balances. Next one, please. So I'm just going to give a quick little history. I know you guys have been sitting here for a while, but the first checks and balances at the state level of the federal authority happened very quickly after the ratification of the Constitution. And the first one was the Alien Sedition Acts, and they were also known as the Virginia-Kentucky Resolutions of 1798. That's within 10 years of the original ratification of the Constitution. And then the second one I'm going to get into is the Brady Bill, which was a gun regulation bill that was signed at the federal level, and has to do with Richard Mack, a sheriff at a county level, who was saying, they don't have authority to enforce this law. You can't force me as a county sheriff to enforce this law if I don't believe in it, because I don't believe that you had the authority to do this in the first place. So I'll get into that a little bit later. So let's first look at the Alien Sedition Act. So the Alien Sedition Act was signed by our first and last Federalist president, John Adams. And John Adams was getting a lot of flack from the anti-Federalists. So creation of the Constitution, we had a lot of Federalists who were really wanting big government, over-expansive government, very powerful central government. And the federal, the central government is very needed. It is needed in certain respects. And then that was versus the anti-Federalists, who was, Thomas Jefferson and many others, James Madison as well. And they were getting a lot of flack from them. So he said, we don't want, just like politics today, accountable, and those are part of the media is our checks and balances as well. And so what happened here, he said a law that anyone that talks poorly about my administration, that'd be treasonous, and we put you in jail. Well, here is Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. This passed the legislation, or passed the legislative branch, it passed the executive branch, and pretty much didn't allow anyone to talk poorly about the John Adams administration. Well, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison said, you know what, this is completely illegitimate, so what do? Well, we nullify it. Because clearly disallowing us to say what we want breaks the First Amendment that was just signed less than 10 years ago. And so what do at the state level? We say, this is illegitimate. It is null and void. And so what they did was they said that it's either nullification or interposition. So before we say, oh, let's leave the Union, we don't need to leave the Union. There's no reason for this. We just say this law is illegitimate. There's nowhere in the Constitution that says that the president or the Congress can say that our speech isn't, we can't use our speech. Okay. So the next one. The next one is the Gun Control Act in 1968. There was a Brady Bill in 1993. And here, I won't get too much into it. And even if you enjoy the gun regulation, I'm not here as a gun supporter or advocate or whatever. I'm just saying, here's a Supreme Court case that a lot of people don't know. And what happened here was that Mack was forced by the federal government to impose these regulations upon firearms. And he said, no, you cannot force me as a county sheriff or my staff to implement federal bills, to implement federal laws. Now, this might sound a shocker to you. No, you must follow federal law. That's, of course, you must follow the federal law. But we say, no, you can't force us. We don't believe, we pledge an oath to the Constitution, and therefore, we believe this is illegitimate. You can't force us to do this. And so he takes it to the local state court. It goes all the way up to the Supreme Court. It's known as Mack versus the United States or Prince versus the United States, and Richard Mack wins. Richard Mack wins this case against the Supreme Court, saying that we don't have to enforce federal laws. So despite how you feel about gun regulation or for it or against it, it doesn't matter. What's important is that the county sheriff disagreed with the federal law, and he won the case at the Supreme Court. So let's go to the next one. Yes, absolutely. So what the interpretation was, and here's Justice Scalia saying that it conflicted with dual sovereignty, that the federal government can regulate international and interstate matters, but it can't regulate interstate matters. So they were trying to deal with a gun that was purchased in the state or whatever. That was interstate matters. It wasn't a gun that would cross the line or anything like that. And so that conflicted the dual sovereignty. And forcing all the police and the county sheriffs under the authority, under the directive of the executive branch, or the federal government branch, would go way beyond the powers that were designed for the Constitution. All right, so you have the federal branch and then the local branches, and this is part of the checks and balances. So the executive branch cannot force all the state police officers and all the county sheriffs into these county laws, because that is a breach of the checks and balances. Next one, please. So, as the Oath Keeper said, and here it is, and I like to bring in the Oregon State Constitution, because a lot of us know that similar language is already there in the national Constitution. But here it is, if you want to promote our state rights and say, hey, well, here it is again in our Oregon State Constitution. Here's the language. Any elected officer affirm that they will defend the civil rights secured by the constitutions of the United States and the state U.S. Constitution. And the state U.S. Constitution, Article 6, Clause 3. So, pretty impressive stuff. It's same as the U.S. Constitution here in the Oregon State Constitution. Next one. Dan's already gone, well over the U.S. Constitution, what it conflicts with. Well, here's a whole list of Oregon State Constitution that it conflicts with. So they're breaking two constitutions. So when we look at our elected officials and we look at our Thomas Turner and our county commissioners, not only are they pledged an oath to the U.S. Constitution, but they pledged an oath to the Oregon State Constitution. And there was a Supreme Court justice that served from 76 to 89 called Hans Lindy. He was also a law professor here at the U of O, and they still give a scholarship in his name. And he was saying that actually states and their state constitutions can provide more protection under the Constitution, our state constitution, than the federal government can provide. So the federal government offers a kind of a borderline protection, but then the state governments can go even further. And there's several cases that we could go into in another presentation of all the times that Oregon State is actually a leader in state constitutionalism of protecting constitutional rights. And we're actually the forefront of almost the entire nation for state constitution and state sovereignty that protects us as the people more than the national constitution can. So here's a whole list of the Oregon ones. And then to go one step further is Lane County has a special something called County Home Rule. And County Home Rule, it allows us a certain sovereignty as just a county and our county commissioners. And I'll read it here. Is a governing body of the electors of the county may by ordinance exercise authority within the county over matters of county concern to the fullest extent allowed by the constitutions and laws of the United States and of the state. So not only are we protected by the Oregon State Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, but now here's an additional one. If we need any more evidence, here's the home rule for Lane County saying that we can do this. Next one, please. Oh, wrong way. They don't want it any longer. No, it's good. And so here's from the Association of Oregon Counties. They put out this paper talking about county home rule. This is all online, and it says police power, which is our county sheriff and our officers who could be enforcing these ordinances that we're trying to do, or resolutions. Police power is far more than law enforcement. It embraces the entire range of government actions to preserve and promote the public order, safety, health, morals, and general welfare. That's very broad. And all we want is our, habeas corpus. All we want is our right to a trial, a right to be secure in our persons and property. Right there in our Constitution. Next one. And then I'll end on this here. Here's Article 1, Section 1 of our Oregon State Constitution. It doesn't take a magnifying glass to find this. It's right there in the front. You don't have to dig through it for days. And I'll read it here because it sounds almost shocking to us. It sounds, well, that's pretty radical. Well, it's right here. Article 1, Section 1. All power is inherent in the people, and all free governments are founded upon their authority and instituted for their peace, their safety, and happiness. Sounds pretty good. And they have at all times the right to alter, reform, or abolish the government in such manners as they think proper. Right? So, We shouldn't be asking, like, hey, Supreme Court, do we have authority to have local sovereignty here? Do we have authority to promote our own Constitution or to protect us of the U.S. Constitution and how we interpreted it and how we ratified it in the beginning of our state? No, we don't have to ask them for their authority. It says right here, Article 1, Section 1. Is that just to pat us on the backs to make us think we have power? No. We have the power if we believe we have the power, if we're educated enough to know we have the power. And we also have the power if we can get our county sheriffs on board. That's where it counts. At the county level, our county sheriffs need to get on board.
Yes,
So we really need to get our county sheriffs and talk to Thomas Turner, because there's many county sheriffs around the state that are already on board with this. Can we take questions? Sure.
I just want to say that Sheriff Turner is hopeless. I'm serious, he is
Right.
hopeless.
You're
And
right.
we need to get someone to run against that man.
I was-
Replace him.
I was absolutely shocked when I was doing my ballot and I saw zero opposition to Thomas Turner. I've heard great things about him. I'm not here to
No.
say that he's an. Maybe we'll get you up here. No. But we could have a whole other meeting about that. I'm not trying to get into that. All I'm saying is that if we put enough pressure on him to say that, hey, buddy, you have an oath to the Constitution, we could bring in. There's county, like I said, there's county sheriffs all across the state that say that that believe in their oath to the Constitution. That's what we need, because that is legitimate. It's not radical. That is your oath. That is your obligation to the state, to your constituents. So I was shocked too that he went unopposed. So maybe we can change that in a couple of years.
Yes.
Next one, let's see what we got.
You recommend that we contact him and tell
Absolutely,
him?
absolutely.
And tell
And in a
him-
meaningful way. In a meaningful way, you should, absolutely contact him. Very respectfully, just
Doesn't take calls.
But he did put out a letter. There was some other county sheriffs that came up and said, we will uphold our oath to the Constitution, but he also said that I'm going to follow the directives that come from above, and that's not what we need as leadership or protecting us as citizens of Lane County. We need someone that knows the Constitution and is willing to protect it and put themselves out there. Okay. I know we're getting to questions. Let's finish this, and then we'll love to take questions. All right. Dan, I'm going to let you handle the legislation that's going on with PANDA and what you guys have been up to.